Monotony. It comes in all shapes and sizes. Dull, tedious, just plain boring. But what is this? A contender, perhaps? Something unboring by the looks of it. Jabs right at dull, an uppercut to tedium, something that keeps you on your toes, keeps your head on a swivel, a knockout punch to your old, boring workouts. Welcome to Fight Camp.
Tickets now. Psycho Killer is coming for you. I'm a twisted writer of 7 and 8mm, and the producers of Barbarian and a producer of Weapons.
You're him.
On February 20th, meet your new nightmare.
Open the gates.
Psycho Killer. Get tickets now.
Yeah, see, I ain't ever been betrayed by an enemy. That shit is only ever come from them saying friend to me. They soul is black, soaking up all of my backup energy. I feel the drain through all the pain, depletes in its entirety. It's piracy, and any thought of reconciling blind to me. You were my people that I chose, you were my family, and didn't realize what you had, your bad need clarity. Because respect is something earned, you can't use bribery. You thought I was a sheep and I would fall in line, but a real bitch tell it like it is, that's facts, this here's my time. Y'all out here out your ever loving mother minds. You had no idea the kind of storm of shit you would find. If you forgotten, we can go ahead and press rewind. Receipts is never something from me, never fall behind. I didn't come at no one crazy, you showed your behinds. I never come for folks, but for you I'll make the time, bitch.
same exact thing.
You might want to answer that phone. It sounds pretty important.
I met this girl at the gym a couple months ago, and she was showing me this app, No Strings. Basically for people who want to get a little sneaky link with no attachments.
I think my wife cheated on me, bro.
What the fuck are you doing here?
I've been calling you all day.
Well, cheers to No Strings. No strings.
No strings, no strings, no strings, no strings, no strings, no strings, no strings. What? Yeah. See, I ain't ever been betrayed by an enemy. That shit is only ever come from them saying friend to me. They soul is black, soaking up all of my backup energy. I feel the drain through all the pain, depletes in its entirety. It's piracy, and any thought of reconciling's blind to me. You were my people that I chose, you were my family, and didn't realize what you had, your bad need clarity. Because respect is something earned, you can't use bribery. You thought I was a sheep and I would fall in line, but a real bitch tell it like it is, that's fastest, here's my dime. Y'all out here out your ever loving motherfucking minds. You had no idea the kind of storm of shit you would find. If you forgotten, we can go ahead and press rewind. Receipts is never something from me, never fall behind. I didn't come at no one crazy, you showed your behinds. I never come for folks, for you I'll make the time, bitch.
Master Yoda I am. And listen, you must to hulazoom.com.
The movie, music, news, television promos, trailers and videos used in this production are protected by the Fair Use Act. Section 107 of the Copyright Act. 1. The purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. 2. The nature of the copyrighted work. 3. The amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. 4. The effect of the use upon the potential market for, or value of, the copyrighted work.
Don't do that again.
Just let me go.
Listen and understand that
Trump American
is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop. Ever. Until you are dead.
Can you stop it?
I don't know. With these weapons, I don't know.
Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
This is blasphemy. This is madness. This is the proof.
Broadcasting from the City of Champions, Brockton, Massachusetts, with your host, Keith Sinista1 Hayes.
All right, it's your boy Sinista1 broadcasting live from the City of Champions. You are watching The Booth. It is March 3rd, 2026. Spring is upon us. We are putting the clocks ahead. Spring ahead. Fall is fall back. So we spring ahead this weekend. And we're here in New England, and we've got snow once again. Snow once again. I got to thank my guests from last week, the hosts of the Graveyard Shift Horror Podcast. I got to thank Mike and Alicia and John for coming on. We chopped it up. We talked a lot about the horror movies and the Oscars that are coming up, and we had a good time. So I got to thank them for coming on the show. My guests are here. It's First Tuesday, and I got to get into my sponsors real quick, and then we're going to get right into this show. It's going to be a different show tonight. So Michael Douglas Barreto, MDB Electronics. If you have a Xbox controller that needs to be fixed, get it out to him. 24, 48 hours, you're back to gaming. Viana Marie, her music is out there everywhere, streaming now, 494,000 streams. Tactical target systems, those are those zombie targets when I go to the range. You want to check those out. Reach out to Tactical Target Systems. Reach out for Dawn Robertson. And then I Love Boston Sports. Those are those shirts that you see the Patriots players and Bruins players wearing. Go down the South Shore Plaza to ilovebostonsports.com. Ladies, if you want to take some photos that you never thought you'd take or have the confidence to take, reach out to Kimberly Ian, Empowerment Photography. My artist, Viana Marie, is pictured there. And then Unarmed Protective Services, Black-owned business. Reach out to Daryl Smith if you need any type of protective services listed there in the photo. And then my buddy called Larry. He's been pretty busy with the snow. He actually put up a post that he's going to be doing steam cleaning of houses heading into the spring, which is something that a lot of people are going to need. So reach out to Larry at the number there. And then tonight, oh, wow, a lot of people in the chat. How's it going, Clancy? How's it going, Renee? We got a lot to talk about tonight. We're dumping the normal format. I got to give a big shout out to Demetrius Minor, who is sick. He was looking forward to coming on the show tonight. Demetrius Minor is going to join us next month. But we've got my two guys here, First Tuesday, and tonight's special episode is going to cover the war in Iran. Now, we've talked about some of this stuff. We had our guy up here, and I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves because Rob has been kind of talking about some of this stuff, and he had been hinting at some of these things that might go on or might not go on, and he was saying how things were coming into play with this. We talked about this when they went into Venezuela, and he had mentioned about, Iran and then the fuel and all this. So tonight, I'm going to actually turn this show over to Rob, and I'm going to let these guys give you their credentials so you can kind of know why I'm turning this show over. So if you're in the chat, if you got any questions, let it go. But I'm going to start with Ken first, and I'm going to let Ken introduce himself and give his credentials because, a lot of people out here, they talk armchair quarterbacks, and they're really not people that have any experience in this stuff. So,
well, thank you, Sinista1. My name is Kenneth Diesenhof. I'm a licensed attorney in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I hold bar admittances in Massachusetts, in the federal system, immigration court, and tax court. I have been practicing law for 30 years. I hold a master's of law in banking and finance. I also, for a short time in my earlier career, worked on the Capitol Hill as a staffer, working for Senator Pat Leahy, who has since retired. I was primarily attached to the Judiciary Committee, and I have been active in politics and doing voter protection for the last 10 years. In addition to that, I've been very active in local, state, and federal politics. I've been a delegate to the Mass State Convention on numerous occasions, and I've also worked with people who are a heck of a lot smarter than me and know a lot more than I do. So those are my credentials. I also have a degree in history, by the way.
And my other guy up here in the left-hand corner, I've been blessed ever since Ken introduced him to the show. I'm just going to let him, I'm not speaking for him. I'm going to let him give his credentials and introduce himself because he's taking over the show tonight. He's getting the floor. So go ahead, Robert.
I'll introduce myself in just a moment, but I was just realizing something earlier today. I think this is about 10 years since I first came on the show.
Oh, wow.
So we've been doing this a long time. I mean,
yes, we have.
Not every week, but I started coming on the show. I think it was about 10 years ago when you guys first invited me. So I think to that end, people who listen to the show probably know my credentials. I don't want to sit here and go through that. I'll just remind people the relevant ones for tonight's discussion. And like Ken, I'm a lawyer, but my specialty has been not only criminal law, but also international law. And having served 25 years on active duty in the United States Army, I got to practice it, not just study it, but practice it and teach it and train it and live it. And now I teach it again. So that's what I'm going to bring to the show tonight. And I'm going to try to do it as academically and objectively as I can.
And as I said, this is a guy, he's teaching this. He's teaching the stuff that's going on in the world right now, the questions that people have, the things that are being done that people are saying are in violation of the law. So, I'm going to sit here like a student tonight, and what we are doing is we're opening the floor, we're opening the chat. We've got this war in Iran. And, this time, one of the things I could say, at least he went to the Gang of 8 that Rob has mentioned on his show the night before the SOTU. He did go to the Gang of 8, but he still didn't wait to hear from Congress. So we're kind of here with this, but I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to let Rob take over the floor. This is his show tonight, guys.
Well, what I thought I would do to start off with, and then we can kind of revert back to questions and comments and what have you, is I thought I would just walk through the construct of how to look at this from a matter of law, domestic law, international law, policy, and do it without comment, just to walk through the construct of how to view something like this. And then we can get into discussion of the relevant issues about, what we're doing, why we're doing it, what should be done differently, or wherever we want to go with it based on, where we're going. So if you want me to, if you'll indulge me a few minutes, I'll lay out the construct, which I think will then allow us to have a good discussion.
I'm going to take my notes.
Going forward.
I'm taking my notes.
Yeah. and so the first thing that we would look at is, of course, international law, because we're part of the world community and this is international armed conflict. So I don't think we need to spend time on this. I think everybody can accept the fact that this is an international armed conflict, right? We're using weapons, we're engaging in destruction, people are dying. And so there's no doubt that this is an international armed conflict. So we'll just start with that as a given. And so what does the law say about that, international law? And so basically, and this goes back, this is not recent, this goes back to the late 19th century and early 20th century. Many of you have heard of one of our presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, a very well-regarded president. President Roosevelt and his staff, his administration at the time, engaged in diplomacy, with international diplomacy, where they tried to outlaw war. And that didn't go very well, because after that we had World War I and then we had World War II. So there have been efforts to outlaw war. But nevertheless, under international law, the law does prohibit the use of force, prohibits aggression to solve disputes between nations. And so technically going to war is a violation of international law. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It means that it should happen as a last resort, but that's the beginning point of it. And so there are exceptions. Obviously, self-defense is always going to be an exception. If you're attacked, you don't have to worry about what the law says. If you're attacked, you can defend yourself. If your friends and allies are attacked, you can come to their defense. So, for example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, anybody in the world, United States, Europe, and others, had the right to go in and defend Ukraine by any means necessary, within the bounds of Geneva Conventions. So that's the issue. So self-defense is an authority to go to war. If you don't have self-defense, and by the way, self-defense is not as obvious as you think. For example, when President George W. Bush and his administration were preparing for the Iraq War of 2003, not the Gulf War of 1990, which his father led, but the 2003 campaign, they sort of modified the definition of self-defense to include preemptive self-defense. That is not wholly accepted in the world community, but there's a good argument about it. Not necessarily that every argument made in 2003 was correct, and not that that argument wholly applies now, but it is important to remember that there is an argument to be made for preemptive self-defense. In other words, you don't have to wait for yourself to be attacked and possibly obliterated or suffer a catastrophic defeat if you know it's coming. So there is an argument to be made for preemptive self-defense. We can get into that later about whether that applies here and how. But self-defense, including a limited version of preemptive self-defense, would be an authority to use force. If you don't have self-defense, then the only other authority to use force is the United Nations. It's in the charter, and everybody signed it. And so the charter says that if you feel that you have been the victim of aggression or unfair treatment or some cause where you think that war is the next step, then you can go to the United Nations, usually the Security Council, of course, and get permission. Now, that's what George H.W. Bush did in 1990. We had UN permission to defend Kuwait after Saddam Hussein invaded to take their oil. So that is the way to do that. Now, obviously, there was also self-defense. We didn't have to go to the UN, but it was a good idea to do both, to claim self-defense of Kuwait and to get the UN resolution supporting it. That obviously isn't going to happen right now, but technically that is what would be required if you don't have self-defense, would be to do that. Now, there's another issue where the General Assembly, in a somewhat controversial way, gave itself authority to intervene on behalf of human rights. So if they feel that there's a significant violation of human rights, they claim that they, the United Nations, can justify intervening in another country's matters. So, again, you could look at human rights as a potential source of intervention, of military intervention. But that's really what international law says. It doesn't give us a lot. It tells us you have self-defense or an authorization by the United Nations primarily. And again, we can get into how that applies a little bit later to this situation. The next thing we would look at is domestic law, which obviously is, for most people, more important. International law is a little bit vague. It's not very well enforced. So we look at domestic law. The first thing to know about domestic law is international law requires that member states, the world community, adopt many of the international law provisions as their domestic law. So that means if we're talking about things like the United Nations Charter and the Geneva Conventions, which we would get into and how to conduct war, those not only are international law, but the domestic law of every nation in the world, because every nation in the world signed the Geneva Conventions. They don't all follow them very well, but they all sign them, and therefore they're obligated to make them their domestic law. And what that means basically is they're enforceable domestically. And so any American can file a claim in court, and any nation can file a claim against another nation for violation of international law in its domestic courts. That sounds very complicated. We don't need to worry about that. But that's the overlap between international law and domestic law. What we're talking about now in the United States is the authority to use military force. And that obviously starts with the Constitution. And most of you know, obviously, we have different branches of government in the Constitution. We have Article 1, that is the legislature, Congress. The framers in the Constitution, in Article 1, gave Congress the authority to declare war, and only Congress the authority to declare war. Congress also has the authority for finances, and so they control the budget. And so by the authority that gives them and only them the authority to declare war, and them the power of the budget, the money, then they can influence the executive branch, the presidency, in whether or not they would authorize the use of military force as a declaration of war or otherwise, and whether or not they would fund it, because if they don't agree with it, they withhold funding. That's a dangerous thing to do when you're in conflict, but that's their powers. And so Article 2, the presidency, gives the president a role in armed conflict because the president is also the commander-in-chief. And people overuse that term. We talk about the commander-in-chief for just about everything. It only applies to the civilian control of our military. The president is the commander-in-chief of the military, and that's relevant, obviously, because the president has to sign regulations that become military authority, and of course the directing the priorities of the military. And so there's definitely some overlap between Congress and the presidency in the Constitution, and that was the way it was written, right? Checks and balances and what have you. So we look at, obviously, Congress's power and the president's power. In 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Act, and that's because there had been ongoing tensions where presidents of, obviously both parties, this is not something that's partisan, but presidents over the years have used military force without a declaration of war by Congress. If you think about it, since World War II, we've had numerous conflicts where we haven't actually declared war. We fight what is basically a war. It's an armed conflict, but we haven't called it a war because Congress didn't declare it. And so that termination of calling something a war is less significant than you might think because of the War Powers Act. And what the War Powers Act does, and I'm not going to go into tremendous detail here, I'll give you the important aspects of it. Otherwise, we'll be here all night on this one issue. But what the War Powers Act gives the president, because the president is the commander in chief and is responsible by the Constitution for the defense of the nation, for our national security, it gives the president the limited authority to act without congressional approval. Because think about it, if we've been attacked or there's an imminent attack, if you start rounding up Congress to get Congress together to debate and vote and authorize, it takes too long. The attack would be over. We could have lost by then, right? So in a limited basis, when the president can identify an imminent threat, or if in fact we've been attacked, which is more obvious, then the president has 60 days by which the president may conduct operations strictly in response to that identified threat against the United States. It is not an offensive thing, it is a defensive thing. And so what the president has to do is usually in advance, they have to brief the Gang of Eight, as you mentioned earlier. The Gang of Eight is basically the leadership of both parties in Congress. You have the Speaker, the majority and minority leaders of the House and Senate, the armed services leaders. And so those people would get a briefing in advance to let them know that this is coming, where the president can identify the threat that allows the use of force without congressional approval. And then that Gang of Eight goes back to Congress and can assure Congress that the president is acting lawfully. And at that point, Congress has 60 days to then make a decision as to whether or not first of all, they could declare war if we're talking about a serious conflict like that, World War II or something like that, or Congress can give a timeline by saying, okay, you've got a total of, let's say, 90 days, 120 days, whatever. The Congress can say, no, we don't give you any authority whatsoever. You have to stop. So Congress can do what the Constitution gave it the authority to do, which is whether or not to authorize and fund military conflict. So basically what happens now in this conflict, I don't want to get into the specifics yet, but because the president briefed.
So a question. So that's kind of what happened with Venezuela, because Venezuela, we waited for Congress, and Congress come out and said, hey, they took those war powers away, so we couldn't go back into Venezuela, correct? When it was also yeah, exactly. Because in Venezuela, they did not brief the Gang of Eight in advance, and that was a violation. Now, let me, to be fair to this administration and other administrations because most administrations have gotten themselves in trouble with the War Powers Act. It's really not a partisan thing. But sometimes you don't have the ability to brief the Gang of Eight in advance. I know that seems odd because of 24-hour communications. Everybody has a cell phone, but you can't talk about this stuff on a cell phone. You have to do it in person in a secured facility in the White House or the Capitol. There are very limited places, or the Pentagon too. And so if you can't do that, then sometimes it isn't practical for the president to do it in advance, especially if you really have an imminent attack. So what the statute says is brief in advance or as soon as possible. So there is the opportunity. Now, for Venezuela, there was ample opportunity to do it in advance. They had been planning for months, and even if they didn't know the exact night they were going to do it, they knew it was imminent, and they could have briefed the Gang of Eight, and they chose not to. And they got their butt kicked a little bit on that one. And so this time they did do it. They did brief them in advance. And so now they have to brief all of Congress. Congress has to hold a hearing, and they're getting the information. So it may or may not work. We'll see what Congress does, but that's what the statute says. So domestic law, that's how it works. If we want to engage in armed conflict, that the president did brief the Gang of Eight. Obviously, it was Secretary Rubio, not the president, but he authorized it. And now Congress has to do its job within 60 days
and it will tell the president, now the president said this mission could take 4 to 5 weeks, so technically it might be over before 60 days, but let's see what happens. That's how the process would work. All right. The next thing then we would talk about would be U.S. policy. And now policy, that's a much more fluid thing. Policy is not law. Policy is what the administration promised to do in campaigns and has set forth in its declaration of national security policy, military policy, economic policy. They have all kinds of policies. We talk about that on the show all the time, whether we agree or disagree with certain aspects of policy. So when you talk about policy, now this, I'm not necessarily getting into the absolute reasons in support or opposition of this particular operation, but when you talk about policies, we talk about what is our role going to be in the world. That's an important policy. Do we want to continue to have a world presence? Do we want to be more isolationist? The president ran on more of an isolationist agenda. This conflict would obviously be the opposite of that. So we have to look at that. We look at what reasons the United States would have to engage in hostilities. And I'm just going to list them. We can debate them and discuss them later. I just want to list them for purposes of this construct, because we've had the administration since Secretary Rubio briefed the Gang of Eight. We've had multiple inconsistent theories of this action by members of the administration, from the president himself to Secretary Rubio to Secretary Hegseth and others. And so on the one hand, we've heard about how, one viable course of action would be that right now China and Russia buy Iranian oil, right? They don't honor the sanctions. They buy a lot of things from Iran. They buy cheap oil from Iran because Iran's willing to sell it cheap. So China's buying all of it. Russia's buying it. Russia's buying their drones. They have a great relationship. And so one of the reasons for this operation is a geopolitical economic argument, which is to deny China and Russia the cheap oil, which could lessen their ability to project around the world and compete with us economically. And so, again, a very complicated issue we can talk about for hours and days, but one of those things that is out there. And of course, also the Russians buying a lot of Iranian weapons. That obviously isn't going to happen if we destroy the weapons and the weapons production facilities. And those are the weapons that they're using in Ukraine. All the drone strikes that are murdering innocent Ukrainian civilians are made by Iran and being sold on the cheap to Russia. So there is some connection there. We can debate whether that's sufficient, but those are some of the issues. You can also go back to the fact that, Iran technically declared war on us in 1979 when they had their revolution and Khomeini came in and you had the hostages taken. That was a violation of international law, and that was an act of war. They invaded our embassy in Tehran. That is sovereign U.S. territory. Embassies by international law are considered the sovereign territory of the nation. And the taking of innocent civilians as hostages was a violation of international law and an act of war. And so ever since then, Iran has been engaging. Now, it's not an even fight. We're a superpower. They're not. But nevertheless, Iran, directly and through proxies, has been attacking the United States and United States interests since 1979. So technically, you could argue that we may have some form of a state of war. It's undeclared by us. It may be somewhat declared by them because they call us the great Satan and the fact that we must be destroyed and everything else. At some point, you have to accept their rhetoric, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one of those issues. The other thing is, what is the goal? Whether Iran should have a nuclear weapon. Well, international law, remember, it's a reality that during World War II, the United States and Germany were in a race to develop atomic weapons, and then the Soviet Union got involved in that, and of course the British and the French. So you had a small group of nations by the end of World War II and shortly thereafter that had nuclear weapons capability, and the world community quickly came together and passed the Non-Proliferation Treaty that basically said no more nuclear weapon states. We don't want this. It's bad enough that we have them. Mutually assured destruction in the Cold War meant that it was unlikely anybody would use them, but nobody else should have them. And Iran is one of those regimes that people quickly identify as an example of who shouldn't have nuclear weapons, because if you believe their rhetoric, it might be that they would use them. Some people would say they wouldn't. They're not that crazy. Some people would say, listen to the rhetoric. Of course they are. And would you risk it? And so the issue is, of course, other nations have gotten nuclear weapons since that treaty. India, Pakistan, people believe Israel has them. South Africa, believe it or not, was rumored to be developing it, and maybe even some other nations. North Korea, of course, we all know is trying to build them. And they have the technology, so they are spreading. So the question is, do you go to war to stop the spread? Would that be something that the international community supports? Is that something that we would support to make sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon? And so right now, as I understand it, there is no perfect science here, but as far as the study of images go from the various bombings throughout Iran, is I heard that about 60%, this was yesterday, that about 60% of Iranian missiles were destroyed. These are the ballistic missiles that they can send all over the Middle East and even to Europe. They can't reach the United States. They don't have that technology yet. They're working on it. But they can strike parts of Europe, and they can definitely strike all over the Middle East. Because if you look on a map, look where Iran is. They're, just south of Russia and, north of the rest of the Middle East, the Gulf states, and just to the east of Turkey. So it's not far for them to strike into Europe. So you've got a lot of different issues. And of course, let's face it, you've got regime change. You have pretty atrocious human rights violations by the Iranian regime against its own people for generations, right? The Iranian people, the Persian people were an incredible civilization. If you study ancient civilization, and even in the more modern times, there's a lot there, and their people have been subjugated by an extreme regime for many decades. And so there is a human rights argument, which then goes back to international law that suggests that human rights enforcement does allow for some intervention. Whether or not it would allow for this is another story. But again, I want to save the debate for a moment. I don't want to monopolize the time. So those are sort of some of the issues when you get into the legal construct and policy questions that have to be answered. Now, let me leave you with this, and then I'll turn it back to you guys to see where you want to go with this.
Yeah, we've got some questions in the chat, so yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you have, this is not a typical administration, of course, but a typical administration always wants the support of the people. That was what went wrong in Vietnam. Our soldiers did an amazing job in Vietnam. Yes, we had some problems. I'm not denying that. But what I'm saying is that we never had the support of the people. And it's very, very difficult to engage in armed conflict of any kind when the people don't support it. And so will this administration make its case to the American people? Because that's why I mentioned earlier that we've had 4 different justifications for what this thing is about. So the question is any of them true? Or is there some other explanation, like a wag the dog theory? Mm-hmm. And so, so what exactly is this about? What is our goal? How do we know what the end state is going to be? Because otherwise the American people, they're not going to give this administration a blank check, so to speak, to, put our troops in harm's way to conduct, we talk about bombing campaigns like somehow they're okay because we're not putting boots on the ground, but the problem is it's incredibly expensive. Every missile we launch is billions of dollars. I mean, this is, our national debt is catastrophic, and here we're about to exhaust our supply of, extremely expensive. Plus, we have planes being shot out of the sky by our friends. And Kuwait shot down 3 planes. So, this is not just some, oh yeah, we're just, taking care of business for a few days. This is a financially catastrophic thing. Now, if our national security requires it, then the people will support it. But right now, I'm not so sure. And so you look at President Trump, who has given multiple different explanations over the few days. You look at Secretary Rubio, that has given inconsistent explanations for what this is about. You had Secretary Hegseth's briefing yesterday that I thought was particularly vile, but of course he's such a vile individual in the first place. I didn't expect anything different from him. I obviously expect better from Rubio, and he's certainly more articulate. I feel badly. I think he's being forced into saying something. I don't care for the man anymore, but I just, he at least understands these things. But he's got to do what President Trump tells him, and of course Hegseth is part of this whole thing. So at the end of the day, what is it that we're doing, and why? And are we going to get the support of the American people? And by the way, well, yes, it's good to have at least one country helping us, which is Israel right now. What about our allies in Europe? What about that? And so there's tremendous hesitation. The British, the French, and the Germans are reluctantly cooperative. In other words, they're not banning us from using our bases in Europe. Spain is, which is why President Trump now, he announced some point today, this afternoon, that he's cutting all ties with Spain. They're going to have what 10,000% tariffs or something silly like that. And so it's I don't know that I would forfeit our relationship with Spain, who is an important NATO ally. I understand, they don't agree with this. Neither do other NATO allies, but they haven't been so forceful about it. And, but we'll see. And then, let's also pay attention, and I'll stop with this point. Let's also pay attention to what Iran is doing, because when you get into armed conflict, which we are in, you have the Geneva Conventions and numerous other treaties that apply. And for the most part, we have complied. Now there are accusations that one of the missiles, hit a civilian target or something like that. Unfortunately, that's what happens in war. We do our best to identify lawful targets. We do our best to use our precision-guided munitions to hit those targets and not other things. But nothing is perfect. Sometimes missiles go a little bit to the left or the right, and they cause damage that we didn't intend to. And so we do the best we can to warn innocent people to get out of the area. But it's not a perfect science. And that doesn't make it a violation of the Geneva Conventions, as long as we're aiming to do the right thing and we've taken reasonable steps to do that. Cross that with Iran. Iran has intentionally launched a series of ballistic missiles, like we talked about, that are going directly to civilian targets. They're going after population centers. They're going after civilian airports. They're going after infrastructure. So Iran is not making much of an effort to comply with the Geneva Conventions. And I don't think anybody's surprised by that. They never have. And quite frankly, they don't have a lot of targets available to them. They don't, their science is not great. And, people are complaining, how are they allowed to bomb our embassies? Well, they don't really have any way to strike us, right? They can try to go after U.S. military bases, which are fortified and protected, which they have been going after. They're also going after embassies, which are certainly protected, but not necessarily from missiles. So it's an interesting thing. And so my point for that is this is going to be costly, deadly. It's going to be what war is. And so I have not taken a clear position for or against. I'm still doing my homework, right? I'm waiting to see what the administration tells us. I hope they tell us in a serious, deliberate, intellectual fashion what is going on. If not, I don't know how much support they'll get from Congress or the American people. When it comes to Iran, Iran has been more than a menace since 1979. The number of terrorist groups they support, the number of attacks they have done directly or through their terrorist proxies like Hezbollah. They've destabilized Lebanon and Syria. They've had attacks against Israel. They've had attacks against our Gulf friends. They've had numerous attacks on us. So I don't have any sympathy for Iran. I do have sympathy for the Iranian people that I think would love to be out of this regime. And so part of me is intrigued by this idea, but I don't do it. I don't think about this blindly. I think this is going to be costly in every possible way, including lives. And so I want to know what the strategy is. I want to know what the end state is. I want to know what comes next in Iran. And I don't know that I trust this administration. Now I'm going to get to my comments here, so I should stop. But I don't know that I trust this administration, to be honest about it, because I don't even know what the imminent threat was that allowed them to act without congressional approval. But again, I will give them the chance to make the case. And if they make the case, I will be the first one on this show and on Corridor and in my classroom to acknowledge it. If they don't make the case, then we'll continue to have this debate and we'll see where we wind up. But let me stop there because I don't feel like I should take more time than I have. I apologize for taking the first half hour.
We do have a question. I'm going to get to the questions first. We get a question in the chat. Renee White is asking, how are the Americans, because you touch base on this thing about the consulates and stuff of that sort. Renee is asking, how are the Americans supposed to get home if the airports are bombed or closed? Now, I saw Abu Dhabi is going to pay for anybody who's stuck there, but there's other places where people are stuck. So how do they get home?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you for that. I didn't think to bring that up, but here's the thing. Because Iran is not only, normally when you have hostilities, airports close down because of safety, but Iran is attacking the airport, so they have no choice but to shut down throughout the region. what people are there are two answers to the question, or really three, I guess. Number one is there's a phone number for Americans in the Middle East who are trapped to call the State Department, and the State Department they have a hotline where they're trying to figure out, based on where you are and how to get you to a way where you can travel safely to get out of that area and then to a place where you can get a flight home. So the State Department is doing something. That's part of the job of the State Department. This is not new, but they've been posting that number. You can get it online. I didn't write it down, but it's easily available.
Mm-hmm.
They're showing it on a lot of the bottom of the news channels too. So that's one thing where you can use the State Department. More directly than that, based on where people are, the airports in Egypt have remained open. So for people who are close to Egypt, if you can get to the airports in Egypt, you can get a flight to somewhere and then a flight home from there. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, first of all, if you can get to Turkey, because Iran has not struck Turkey, because that would be Article 5 of NATO. So they're not striking Turkey. So you can go to Turkey if you can get there. And, again, depending on what part of the world you're in, I don't know which direction people can go to. And again, this is not easy to do. If you're stuck, you're stuck. But these are the options anyway. And so you can get to Turkey. The other thing to do is go by boat, because airports are closed. And certainly the Strait of Hormuz is closed. But if you can get access to a boat, for example, if you're on the Mediterranean side, you can go to Cyprus and you can get flights out of Cyprus. If you are on the Gulf side, then I guess you have to go south enough or east enough to get to a place where the airports are working. So it is by no means a perfect solution, and it is definitely not easy to do. But if you need to evacuate and the State Department can help you, those are your options.
Ken, you have a question before I get into mine?
No, I think Rob covered it. I've got a couple of comments, but I think Rob covered it with his usual detailed analysis, which is both enlightening and highly accurate.
Yeah, my opinions are subject to debate. My discussion of the law is pretty accurate, I can assure you.
So my question is, I've been intrigued with Iran since '79, since I was a kid when we had this whole thing, when Iran did this thing, and I remember seeing the people come out blindfolded. And, I see a lot of people on social media, they're talking about, well, the Iranian people are happy, they're partying in the streets. And I tell people, we've seen this time and time again. These people live under dictatorships. Yes, 90% of the people are happy. We're happy for them partying in the streets. But what I've seen and what I've come to know over the years when dealing with the Middle East, it doesn't matter if 90% of the people are happy in the street, because that 10% who's going to be deaf to America for taking down their supreme leader, who is number 2 to God in their minds, they become threats. These 10% are the people who snatch up tourists or snatch up soldiers that are boots on the ground. And then the next thing you know, these people are videos and getting beheaded. We've seen horrible videos of journalists that Iran had snatched up. It doesn't have to be a majority. Iran fights wars differently. Iran operates with cells, small. You're in the military. You know about this. You know how they can, if you're a soldier over there, there's got to be things once you hit the ground that they tell you, hey, don't be friendly with anybody, right? I mean, the last thing you want is somebody snatched up and then they show up on a video, and because we saw this with Desert Storm. So your thoughts on that 10% as a threat?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It doesn't take much, right? Because the shooting in Austin, Texas over the weekend, that person was not from Iran. It was too soon, but that person was most likely motivated by, radicalization, a lone wolf, whatever you want to call them. And, based on the shirt that he was wearing anyway, and what happened. But this is what's going to happen. And so Americans abroad are vulnerable. And, if you travel the Middle East, this is one of the things to think about, whether or not you have proper safety precautions and you're willing to assume the risk that, somebody in retaliation for this, is looking to kidnap Americans either for ransom or for propaganda, beheadings. And so that happens. Now that would have happened a week ago too, before this campaign started, because they've been doing that for the longest time, but it certainly could be worse now. And until and unless there's a new regime in Iran that can quiet things down, this is going to be a constant state of affairs. And like you say, even if there was a new friendly representative regime, you're still going to have a segment of the population that is radicalized and is going to be angry at America for the death of Khamenei and the others. So yeah, this is going to be a dangerous situation for a while, even if we stop right now.
Clancy is in the chat. This is a good question. I'm going to add on to his question. He says, how about the possibility of sleeper cells here in America? And
yes.
He brings up a good point there. It's definitely something you have to worry about. People being activated here. Yeah,
absolutely. There's no doubt that Iran has had sleeper cells in this country. So has Russia, China, and others. It's not just Iran. But what does it take for them to awake their sleeper cells? Maybe this is what it is, or maybe not. But yes, we always face that. I mean, we've been very lucky since 9/11 that we've been able to stop any significant international terrorism. We've had domestic terrorism. We've been able to stop most international terrorism, but that's taking a huge effort by the FBI and Homeland Security and local police across this nation. They have to remain vigilant 24/7 to keep us all safe. And so we should always remember that while we debate these things, let's be thankful for the people keeping us safe across this country, the people who are sworn to to identify threats and stop them, or God forbid respond to them, because we owe them a debt of gratitude.
Well, I worry about this because one of the things that this Trump administration has done, this administration has pissed so many of our allies off. Mm-hmm. People forget that a lot of our allies have said, hey, we're not sharing intel with you no more.
Yeah.
Ken, you want to talk about
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I really think we need to divide this debate into whether we had legal cause for the action or whether it was a good policy decision.
That's right.
Those are two different questions. Rob is absolutely right. There's no question Iran has given us casus belli, or causes for war, and they've done this since 1979. Okay? And they declared war on us. We're the great Satan, they want to, blah, blah, blah. So if you strictly apply international law, yeah, they did that. They also attacked an ally of ours, Israel, on the October 3rd, which is an act of war. They also supported the Hutu, I hope I'm pronouncing this correct, Rob.
Houthi
rebels in Yemen, which attacked international shipping, which is an act of war. Even though they didn't directly do it, their support. They also gave aid and comfort to Russia when it invaded an ally of ours, Ukraine. No question about it. I am not losing any sleep over anyone who has died, for the possible exception of the children who killed in collateral attacks. I'm not sitting shiva for the commander of the IRC or the Ayatollah. You play with fire.
I thought you were going to go a big, long white beard.
Right. You play with fire, you get burned. Don't come crying to me. Okay? So don't misunderstand me. I think the world is a better place with these people gone.
We all do.
But the question then becomes, okay, yes, we had legal justification, no question about it. That argument was settled in 1979, as Rob pointed out, when they took over our embassy, which was an act of war. And they've done nothing to come to the peace table. The question is it a good policy decision? First of all, we got to find what are our policy objectives in that area, which I don't think Trump has policy objective other than enriching himself and grifting. The second is, and this is a step thing that I learned when I was in college taking international relations. First of all, you got to identify what your policy objectives are. Then you got to identify how you seek to achieve those policy objectives. And third, what is the cost of achieving those policy directives? And it's very common with Iran. We've always maintained that, yes, we like regime change, and we want a stable Middle East, we want peace, but we also figured out that direct confrontation with Iran wasn't worth the cost. We had an old saying in my fraternity back in the day, make sure the effing you're getting is worth the effing you're getting. Okay? All right. Rob made a very important point, is that we spent an incredible amount of money, both in material and lives, with Iran, we don't have a very deep bench when it comes to these missiles. They're very expensive. So we keep a few all around.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's smart. You know, we can't bank up the country just to have enough missiles. That's smart. So what happens now that we spent all these missiles and we have a problem in China? What if China decides to invade Taiwan, which they claim they want to do by 2027? Whether they do or not, listen. What do we do about that? We've also now opened ourselves up to Iran can say, well, you attacked us. Under the rules of war, we can attack you. Now, they don't have the ability to do a formal invasion of the United States, but they do have, as Rob pointed out, the ability to launch missiles into our allies. And I want to be very careful about this. One of our biggest allies in the region, who I'm not a big fan of, and I don't think you two either, is Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Iran is concerned, Saudi Arabia is their number one security threat, followed by Russia, followed by China, followed by the US, and maybe Israel at the bottom of the list. And the simple reason for that is why Saudi Arabia and Iran have been enemies for centuries. Remember, Iranians are not Arabs. They are Persians. Never forget that. They are Persians, and they are very proud to be Persians. They don't see themselves as part of the Arab world. They see themselves above. In fact, Iranian is the term in Persian for Aryan. They believe they're the Superman. They make no mistake about it. And they're also Shia as opposed to Sunni, which is another issue. So their main enemy in the region is Saudi Arabia. And they want to destabilize Saudi Arabia. And they'll do anything to destabilize that regime.
That's right.
Okay? China is also another enemy. So Russia and Russia, believe it or not, even though they're cooperating right now, more of a follow that under the great Winston Churchill comment, if Hitler invaded hell, I'd make a reference to the devil in the House of Commons. But don't think they're friends. They're not. They're mutual parasites. Russia is using them. Iran is using Russia. Okay, so that is, we lay that. So what did we do? What objectives did we accomplish with these airstrikes? Well, we eliminated certain members, certain leadership. Okay, again, not crying. But will that affect regime change? And the answer, in my humble opinion, is no. And this is looking at history. Mm-hmm. Nowhere in the history of humanity, since we had air power, has airstrikes caused regime change. It doesn't work. The only thing that works is boots on the ground. Number two, who is going to take their place? Who is the government in exile? Who is the opposition? Just because we got rid of these clowns doesn't mean the people following up are going to be any better. Okay? You got to remember, the Iranian people do not like their government. They've made it quite clear from the protests. But they don't like getting bombed either. I think that's more important. And they're not happy. And they want regime change on their terms, not on our terms. Okay? We also have, remember, Iran has a very, very powerful internal military police organization. Okay? And they are loyal to the regime. And they have no problem cracking heads to establish their rule. And if they have to kill 1,000 civilians, they're not going to sweat, anything about it. One of our police authorities kills one person in Minnesota and it's national news. We do 2 congressional hearings. Number 3, they're calling for the impeachment. Iran kills 1,000 people, and I bet anyone doesn't even notice. So think the way they look at things. So what do we do now? How do we, even if we affect regime change, we don't know who we're going to do. The other thing is now we've managed to endanger our allies. The UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel. I mean, Iran may not be able to get us, but damn it, they can bomb the heck out of Tel Aviv, out of Riyadh, out of every place else. Now, we've managed to put our allies in a bit of a box, and we didn't bother to tell them. I think that's another thing. The other thing is, as Rob pointed out, and the last point, and then I'll shut up. We learned after Vietnam, never get into a war unless you had at least a plurality of people supporting, or at least not actively opposing. I read a poll and I'm trying to get it verified. I don't know if it's true or not. I do trust the source that gave it to me. However, I've not been able to find the actual poll, two polls. Supposedly, Gallup did a poll in 1973 finding how many Americans supported our continued involvement in the Vietnam conflict. It was 29. It was 29%.
Mm.
Supposedly, there is a poll out there right now asking, do you support our involvement with Iran and continued involvement? It's currently at 27%. Again, I've been unable to independently verify either one of those polls, and I've been unable to find out how many people they talked to over what time, and I'm very careful. But that being said, even if it's even somewhat close, if you're less popularly involved in conflict in Vietnam, that's not good. And you also look at the, granted, I am abhorrent to even mention this, but if you look at the people on social media, the so-called influencers, I am hard to find anyone who's actively supporting this. At best, you get what Rob is saying. Look, I'll give the administration time to make their point, make their case, but they better do it, and they better do it quickly, and they better do it in detailed analysis. That's the best. We're getting a lot of people going, hey, we voted you to end wars, not start them. You're acting like the Democrats and Joe Biden. Okay, and these are the MAGA hardcore people. So you may want to check,
Well, yeah, the base is messed up. Renee White's in the chat. She says bombing the school with the girls has me upset, which Rob mentioned. And I've discussed this over the years. We've had these things happen, and it happens quite a bit in the Middle East. And I feel like, this is just my opinion, I'm not speaking like I know. My opinion is, I feel like in these countries, I think they purposely put schools near these targets just for this reason, so we look bad. That's my opinion. It could be like Rob said. It could be like Rob said, a stray missile or whatever. But I feel like these people live on martyrs. They live on people's sacrifices.
No.
Go ahead.
That's not an opinion. Okay, that's fact.
Oh,
okay. No, that's fact. They purposely do that for three reasons. Number one, if they openly tell you they're doing it because their fear is you won't take the risk of bombing the school. Okay, it's a form of anti-aircraft. They have said, well, if we put this school or hospital near an ammo dump, or we put an ammo dump underneath the hospital, which is done a lot in Gaza and the West Bank, that's a deterrent for them not wanting the PR nightmare. Okay, that's number one. Number two, a lot of these facilities are dual function. This happened the first Iraq war, where there was a storage facility that was used as a bomb shelter. Now, unfortunately, the U.S. Air Force didn't know that at the time, and they thought, ammo dump, bomb it. They bombed it. They blew it up, destroyed the ammo. They also killed 300 people who were sheltering in the bomb shelter. Okay, it was a legitimate target under the Articles of War. Okay, it still doesn't look good on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post. Last but not least, I'm not so sure the story is 100% accurate. They claim they bombed a girls' school. What school? What was the school doing? Where was it located? Was it near a military facility or intelligence facility? Who are these people going there? The current administration is not big into educating women, in case everyone hasn't noticed. So the first thing that occurred to me was, wow, that's interesting. You have a girls' school in a country that thinks women are there to take care of their husbands and breed children. So again, I don't know, and I need more information. As Rob had pointed out, we need a lot more details about exactly what happened. Was this? I was talking to another friend of mine who is a retired Air Force pilot, and he said, wait a minute, what if, he said, this is a possibility that happened when he flew in the Iraq War, is they hit a target and it blows up. The problem is, once you blow up a target, you now have an uncontrolled explosion that can spread. So what happened in Iraq a couple of times, especially when they were bombing the cities, you'd blow up the target, and then the shrapnel and the explosives would fire and land in other places and bomb them. So in essence, the Iraqis bombed their own people. So is that what happened? We don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen the BDA, the bomb damage assessment. I haven't seen the reports. So
we got a lot of people in chat. Michelle,
let me just add to that real quick. I mean, what Ken said is accurate. Obviously, when you're bombing a legitimate target, you have to consider the blast radius and the shrapnel. You know, that has to go into all the analysis. So hopefully we're cognizant of that, and that's not exactly what's happening, but that is what happens in war, because nothing, the wind changes, things change. It's what it is. I just wanted to comment real quick. I've seen some various polls that go all over the place because it's too soon. People don't even know what they're talking about yet, as far as whether they support it or don't support it, because it hasn't been defined. So the polls are all over the place. And the other thing that I was going to say, what was the first thing you mentioned, Ken? I forgot what.
About the first thing I mentioned, the 3-step, is they intentionally put schools in places near.
No. At the very beginning. Anyway, it'll come back to me. But the issue is, obviously with popular support and everything is very, very, very true. And that's the thing that, it behooves the administration to be able to make its case. And, that means the president at some point is going to have to go on national television and explain all this. And other presidents have done that. Not that everybody changes their mind, but that's what has to happen. Here's what I was going to say about, what comes next. One of the processes is, of course, the Shah's son is in the United States and has been willing to go back on a temporary basis. Now, who knows? They didn't really like the Shah either, by the way. That's why the revolution happened. But, this guy says he would go back in as an interim government and then be a transitional. And if that's true, then that's a viable option, at least to get things going where they can hold an election or figure out what they're going to do next. But even if the Shah went back as the Shah, that would still be an improvement to this regime. But I don't know that that's feasible. I don't know how the Iranian people would react to that. So it would be interesting to see. Obviously, anything would be better than this regime. There aren't, a lot of the senior leaders were all killed. So it'll be, they would be dipping down to people that are unknown to us in the intelligence community. And so that's dangerous because a lot of times, if we have background information on people, then we can kind of have some sense of what they might do, their priorities and what have you, whether we can have negotiation with them. But, if these are going to be all relative unknowns, they may be very, very aggressive and they may not be people that we understand yet. So there's a lot of complications, as the consequences to what's going on. But I think, your points were tremendously valid.
Michelle Sibley's in the chat. Rob, she wants to thank you for your service in the chat, so she dropped that in there. Somebody said, thank you for clarifying the information, Ken, on that. And, again, like I said, I'm blessed to have these guys on with me. I got a lot of knuckleheads on my page, a lot of MAGA nitwits on my page that talk about crap they don't know anything about. They share memes of false information. One of the things I talked about this is I felt the timing of this was pretty crazy because we talked on this show about the fact that the Clintons were going to testify and how them testifying was going to force Jim Jordan to have the DOJ question Trump in this matter. And here we go. The Clintons testify on Thursday, and Wednesday. They testified. Both of them testified. They were done on Thursday, and the attack goes down Friday night while we're sleeping, and Saturday. So it stirs up the conspiracy theorists that this is one of the reasons why we're trying to draw that attention away from these files again. There's so much things that we could say. It's crazy, but first of all, we now have 7 coffins coming home with flags draped over them. And a lot of, as Ken said, a lot of the MAGA peeps, a lot of them, the podcasters, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a lot of them are flipping. And you have a special election going on right now in Texas that's being reported that the Democrats are at the polls in record numbers right now in Texas. I don't know if you guys were following that. You've got
Yeah,
Jasmine
there's
Crockett.
a big update we should discuss.
Oh, go ahead. If you know, yes, please.
Not with the results. We're not going to get results out of Texas because, one of the things we talk. I'm sorry to switch gears so completely.
No, because it's important.
Update.
This is important.
The remember on the show we've talked about since 2016, since 2018, since 2020, a lot of these we'll call them red states for lack of a better term at the moment have been putting in what are really voter suppression measures, right? Designed to frustrate voters, to make them have to stand in long lines so they give up, to make them have to travel long distances to the polls so they choose not to, those type of things. And so what came out of Texas just recently is a court just ordered the Dallas polling locations to stay open 3 extra hours because so many voters were complaining that they had been sent to the wrong polling locations by the voting officials who, as part of these, so-called changes, so-called voter laws. And so people who are registered voters who have every right to cast a ballot are being screwed with and, intentionally, so they couldn't cast a ballot. And so thankfully they're going to get 3 extra hours. I don't know how many people will do that. A lot of people will just say, forget it and go home. But that's an important update because this is the consequence of what we've talked about on this show with these measures of trying to prevent people from voting. It already
worked against them. They already lost a seat. It worked against them already. Go ahead, Ken.
If I can, I have a cousin of mine who lives in the suburbs of Dallas, and I actually have been talking to him about this very issue.
Yeah.
What is interesting, to Rob's point, what has been happening is a lot of the religious organizations, of all people, have been, this is ironic because a lot of these organizations are somewhat conservative, but they band together to help people vote, supplying them with rides to polls, with giving them food and water while they're waiting online, giving them free cell phones if they need to call a relative. Actually, even creating daycare. Like I said, my cousin, the synagogue which he lives they're literally across the street from one of the polling places in the suburb of Dallas. I don't remember the name of it. Don't ask me. I should. But it's apparently one of the main polling places. The synagogue is offering free daycare for anyone who wants to go and vote, and they don't want the kid on the line with them. They're going to have them play games, and they've got the synagogue is huge. It's gigantic. They've got close to 1,500 families. I mean, this synagogue is almost as big as the Fitchburg State campus, and they have a playground, and they have a room for games and stuff like that. So they're offering their space. Well, hey, if you got a young child who doesn't want to wait online for an hour and a half, drop them off at our synagogue. We'll let them play with our playground. We got board games. We got youth leaders who will help them. They want to do singing. So they're doing that. A number of religious organizations are doing that. So that's why the turnout is, I think, so high, is people are willing to vote, are motivated to vote for various reasons, and people are helping them do this. This story is not getting out, and I don't know why. But these are I want to stress this, these are all nonpartisan groups who are banding together, who are incredibly offended at the voter suppression and saying, okay, you want to do this, we'll help people vote.
And if the Democrats get a hold in Texas after they tried to pull this crap, I know, Ken, you said on this show, when we talked about this upcoming Texas, you said it won't look good for midterms. This is...
No, it won't. Again, I'm relying on one person who is a liberal Jew from New York, who's been living in Texas for almost 40 years. And he said right now, he was telling me, he said, Ken, you don't seem to understand. There are a lot of very angry people in Texas right now. And Texas is a lot closer, although it's being dominated by Republicans. He says that control is very, very thin. And he said there are people who are going to be blood on the floor. If the legislature gets flipped, or even if there's a significant minority, there's going to be blood on the floor. Because a lot of people in Texas, and he was explaining this to me, is when I think of Texas, I think of two things. What do you think of Texas? You think of oil and cattle, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. I don't think much else of Texas, but apparently there's a huge agricultural community in Texas. I never realized that. Apparently there is. What do I know? I'm from the Northeast.
So,
let me finish.
I got to jump in here. If it's agricultural, I'm going to say a lot of those people were pissed off at the fact that Trump gave that money to Argentina, and you just pissed that entire base off.
They are beyond infuriated. They are beyond infuriated. A lot of them, he said, Ken, you know, I've never been to so many meetings with people who wear MAGA hats wanting to lynch Trump. And he says a lot of these people, number one, the agricultural problems, the ICE raids are not popular because who makes up the majority of the blue collar workers in Texas? Hispanics. Some of them are U.S. citizens. Some of them are properly admitted foreign nationals. But guess what? A big amount of them are not. And they work the jobs no one else wants to work.
Yeah, I knew. I saw a 60-minute story with some of the farmers in Texas that were, you know, they were on there talking about, I voted for Trump, I thought, and one guy said he was about to have to close his farm down because that money's going to Argentina, and on top of that, he's going to pay tariffs on crap now. So Trump did nothing for them.
And not only that, one of the biggest issues in Texas was fuel prices. Now, again, you and I and Rob will get aggravated. We have to fill up. It costs us a couple of 10, 20 cents per gallon more to fill up our car. Okay, it annoys us. To Texans, especially those working in the agricultural industry, and that's the difference between having a really good year and bankruptcy.
Right.
So they are, all I can say is, again, we're not going to have results for a couple of days because I think a lot of the stuff is going to be challenged, but it's not looking good.
Before we say our goodbyes, it's 8:07. Wow. Let me get into our outro banners, and then we're going to go around the horn and let these guys say their goodbyes. These are the hats and banners. I want to thank everybody for supporting the show that have come on here. These are the shows that I produce. Oscar Mike Radio on Thursday nights, Drafting the Circuits, Turnbuckles and Spilt Liquor, Bat Bus, upcoming events. You can scan the QR code, and after the Bat Bus service goes, you can get an Uber. February 25th. Oh, that's over. I got to take that off. That was the open chair tour by Stephen Pina. The Lenten Luncheon takes place on Fridays. The Lenten Luncheon is at the First Lutheran Church on Fridays. Then we've got the Brockton Arts Paint Night. That just happened February 28th, so I want to thank them for sending this flyer over. And then we got March Madness. Wow, we're already in the March Madness. This show takes place on March 8th in Taunton. I'll be in Vermont. I've got a buddy whose mom's passing away, so we got to go up for this. March 21st, the Food Truck Festival at the Brockton Rock Stadium. Make sure to come through 12 to 5. And then the Microchip Clinic is where I go and take Jupy to get her rabies shot every year. March 22nd, it's $15 for a rabies vaccine, $15 for microchip. Already signing up for Little League Baseball, Youth Baseball, 5 to 18 here in Brockton. So make sure to go over to brockton.org, brocktonbaseball.org, and then the place where I'm going to bring Jupy, they're also offering a pet CPR first aid class on April 25th. And then again, Method Man, Red Man, the Locks and State Property. Tickets are on sale now. That's May 30th. That's going to be at the Gaines Arena. And then again, you can ride the Bat Buses for free until June of 2026. I think, again, that is going to be extended. They're trying to make public transportation free. And then Jeremiah, the Austria World Games 9-day experience. Please scan the QR code. Let's get this young man to there. And then save the date. The Boston Brothers 3rd Annual Motorcycle Car Ride takes place July 25th. I've moved my Shriners Ride for that event so we can show support. And again, I got to thank everybody for coming on this show and hanging out with us. And all y'all in the chat who's Renee White's in the chat. She says, thank you for the information. Again, gentlemen, I'm going to go around the horn. I'm going to let Ken speak first.
I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners, all 12 of you. You're awesome. Folks, it's getting nasty out there. Be safe, be warm. If you're shoveling, lift with your knees, folks. Lift with your knees, not your back. We will see you next month in April. Hopefully the weather will be better. And above all, be safe.
And I got to give this now over to the guy who led the show tonight. I felt like, you know, we needed to really let Rob really speak on this. This is a very important thing. I felt like that other topics were not important with what is going on in this country. So I'm going to let Rob close it out, and thank you for a great show tonight, Rob.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. First of all, thank you to you two for allowing me to kind of lecture a little bit, because I think it was helpful to talk about this stuff and avoid the commentary, at least at the beginning, to let our listeners really try to understand how to look at not just this, but similar things, because this will happen in our lifetimes. This is not the only time. And maybe it helps understand some previous uses of force. So I thanks everybody for listening, for the comments in the chat, and for the opportunity to talk about something important. This is where the show, I think, is at its best, because other people are making a lot of noise. We took our time. We tried to be intelligent about it. People can agree or disagree with our conclusions, but I think you understand where we come from and why. So I appreciate this opportunity.
No, it was great. It was great stuff. Again, I see people commenting on the people on my page, and here's the funny thing. I tell everybody, once a month, these guys come on. These guys have their credentials. And I tell people, hey, if you want to get educated, if you want to know the facts, come on. And as you guys are out here watching in the chat and seeing this show live, the same MAGA nitwits who are on my page, they know when this show goes live. They know when these guys are on. They choose not to come on, and guess what's going to happen? Tomorrow morning, 90% of those MAGA nitwits are going to be on my page, and they're going to be all over it again. Yet they didn't come in here tonight because these people don't want to know the facts. They want to live in this bubble of whatever it is. It's just craziness. And I'm blessed. I'm blessed to have these guys on. So I got to thank these guys for coming on here. And I'm kind of leaning towards, hopefully, maybe I'll let these guys know. We'll talk about it. But as the weather gets better, we did do a show one time at Brockton Cable Access as a test. I might try to do that again this year now that Rob is living up here. So it's kind of easier to kind of plan that out. But maybe we should do that and come up with something. Hopefully things will get better, guys. Hopefully things will get...
From your lips to God's ear.
Much better. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're at 812. Great stuff. And again, Rob, the coroner, let them know what you do over there, other than carrying Ken on your back.
No, I mean, we try to write shorter pieces on just like this. We'll take our time and go through the background, either the legal background, the factual background, and we'll draw conclusions that people are free to agree or disagree with, but we'll lay it all out for people. So if you like what we do on the show, come check out The Corridor on Facebook.
And before we get out of here, there is something that did sicken me this week, and I'm sickened by it. And yesterday, Hegseth changed the Department of Defense to Department of War. This week, the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, people, stop beating her up, stop bashing her. This wasn't her decision. She had no say. This is the reason why this administration put yes people in these positions. The Department of Education has now hung these gigantic banners outside of the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., a government federal building. And on that building, they have a lot of people who have influenced education in this country over 250 years, such as Martin Luther King Jr. Well, 2 banners down from Martin Luther King Jr., this administration has decided to put a banner up of Charlie Kirk, who absolutely brings nothing to the table. Charlie Kirk is no different than me, an influencer who has a podcast, who speaks his mind. Charlie Kirk was nothing. He didn't deserve flags to be flown at half-mast. And I'll tell you right now, Charlie Kirk, did he die tragically? Yes. Is it murder? Yes. But does this man deserve a banner to be hung on a government federal building? Absolutely not. If you guys want to chime in, Ken?
First of all, let me explain to him. Charlie Kirk is a community school dropout. Rob, you are all more educated than he is. He is a nobody. He was a rebel rouser. He was a clown. And I'm sorry, if you're the Secretary of Education, that's your building. You take responsibility for any banners hung off him. She was wrong. He's also very partisan. You don't put people up in a government building who are partisan unless you're trying to own the libs. And that's not how you unify a country.
Rob, real quick before we close this out, man.
No, we've had enough. That I agree with what you guys said. It's called fascism.
Ooh. We'll end it on that note. SpongeBob, do us a favor. Take us home.
See you next Tuesday.
Thank you for listening to The Booth on Hoobazoo and HatcherRadio.com. Please follow the Facebook page and subscribe to the podcast at Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. The Booth is a Sinista1 production hosted by Sinista1.
I've got to start hanging out with friends that are a little more intelligent and understand politics and stuff. It's just that I'm up on this level up here, and all my friends are down here. Me, nah. You guys, nah. Maybe a little more down in here. Screw you guys, I'm going home.
I smoke, I drink, I do my thing. These bitches hating, so you know I got to make it plain. Don't do cocaine with your chick, my main. We stick together, true forever, yeah, you know we bang. I miss those days, which was easy. If only I make it, this shit don't repeat. Now that I done upgraded, I've been upstate, but y'all think I'm playing. And I got a hit now for these weak assholes who think I ain't slaying. Try me, and I'll probably end up laughing, cause I never back down. I'm that chick with a clean ass whip, I don't need that shit, I got my own now. I get hurt, I get tired of fussing, fighting, guess I gotta crack down. Don't mess with me, cause on everything, I'ma have to bring the whole city out.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website.